Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Warner, and I'm an alumni career coach with Tufts Career Services. Welcome to the Make Your Resume Pop webinar. A little more about me. I've been with Alumni Career Services at Tufts for 16 years, and before that, I worked primarily as a career coach in various settings, but also spent 5 years at Mass General as an internal human resources recruiter. So, both as a recruiter and as a career coach, I've looked at a lot of resumes over the years, helped people with them, and given some advice and perspective along the way. So, we'll talk more, get into the details of resumes in a moment, but I just wanted to tell you briefly about Tufts Alumni Career Services. We have three main goals. First, present programs like this, including webinars and some in person networking and industry related events for all alumni, all schools. Secondly, foster networking and connections between alumni and between alumni and students, including a new online resource for alumni to student networking called The Herd. Details on our website and the Tufts Alumni website. And you'll also see it in my email signature and Nicole's as well when we send you emails following up the program. And thirdly, and really the core of our program, is providing individual career coaching services for graduates of arts, sciences, and engineering, grad and undergrad, and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. Now, today's webinar, some housekeeping. I'll be presenting from 1 o'clock until about 2:15. During that presentation, you can type in your questions anytime. And you'll find either at the top or the bottom of your screen this toolbar, and you click on Q&A and you type your questions into the Q&A, and then I'll stop the program, a couple of times during my presentation to address questions, or sometimes I may interweave them if they're related directly to the content that I'm talking about right then. In addition, if you can and want to stay on the line until 2:30, if there are additional questions, I'll continue to answer them and keep the lines open. So again, please use the Q&A option, which you'll see either at the top of your screen or at the bottom. I'm also going to be referencing specific resumes that I'll use as samples to demonstrate some things. Nicole sent copies of them before the webinar. I'll have them up on my screen and be showing a few pointers while we're talking as well. So welcome, and let's get started. On our agenda, resumes, are they extinct? But you'll see my answer in bullet number 2, why you still need a good resume. Next, a 3-step process to developing and writing your resume, some different possible resume formats, and some trends and resources. So, are resumes extinct? If you want to have some fun, you can Google that phrase, are resumes extinct? And you'll actually find some articles. Some of them saying, yes, the resume is dead, and others saying, well, all these other platforms and fact true, but you still need it. And the reason that sort of confusion or mixed messaging is out there is that the resume is really a leftover from a more traditional job market where employers would place an ad in a local market, a print newspaper or a professional magazine, and they would get a certain number of resumes back and review them to see what the match might be. Now, with job ads online, either on a company website or other online resources, people apply from all over the world. I promise you they're not all qualified, but the employer still needs to keep track of them. So the volume is much, much higher. Again, I promise you they're not all really your direct competitors for the job, but the employers can't possibly read or look at all of the resumes they receive in many cases. So we talked in the job search seminar about how you do get your resume looked at, and the key word there is networking, talking to people, developing relationships is a big part. But what I would suggest is resumes are still a part of job search etiquette. Most Many, if not most employers, still expect to see a resume in a format that they're used to in their industry, that will communicate directly and quickly what you bring that matches their needs. But it can't be your only job search tool, right? Other things are more important, and in some industries and sectors, much more important than a traditional resume. But there still may be a place where it's, oh, upload your resume to the portal. Why do you still need a resume? We've been talking about it a little bit. Part of it is that it's still the etiquette in the process, even though employers are using a variety of methods to communicate with applicants. Some of you may have experienced. But the resume, one advantage that it has over other things that you could be doing, for example, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is terrific. Separate webinar where we talked about LinkedIn. But LinkedIn needs to speak to all of your potential audiences. The same thing if you have a personal website, important for some industries, less crucial for others. It needs to speak to all your potential hiring managers, people that could collaborate or work with you, whereas a resume is a very targeted marketing brochure. It sells your product, which is you, your strengths, your skills, your value proposition for this specific employer, this specific hiring manager, point in time. So does that mean I'm saying you tailor every resume to every different job you apply for? Well, most of us don't have time to do that, but you definitely tailor it to the industry and the job function, right? So even if you're going to do the same job function of human resources, if one application is human resources in the manufacturing sector, and you've had a lot of experience working with unions and manufacturing employees, and another resume is going to someone in higher ed, a higher ed human resources job, you may change your wording, you may change your emphasis, but this is the real advantage of a resume. You can really point it towards this industry, this job function at this point in time. And you show them how you can get results for them by meeting their top priority needs. Now, some of you may already be wondering, well, gee, aren't I doing some of that customizing and tailoring in the cover letter? And the answer is yes, but or you can't be sure that even if you are getting eyeballs on a document, that they'll read both documents. You need to make sure that the resume really hits how you can meet their top priority needs, as clearly as you can. And in addition, doing that in the cover letter. So what is our three-step process? Common sense. First you need to have a definition of your job target. What's the target industry, target job function? And by the way, when I use the word industry, that includes government, nonprofit, NGOs, think tank. It's just sort of a shorthand way of saying the type of sector, the type of area of the working world. If you're not sure what your target should be, so perhaps you are thinking about a career change, but you're not sure to what, or you're re-entering the job market after some time away, taking care of family or other responsibilities, then you really need to do a thorough self-assessment. And so what are my skills, abilities, interests, needs, goals, and then market research, what's out there and what's that possible match. That said, particularly if you're, let's say you've been home or out of the workforce for 5 or 10 years, you want some sort of document or way to communicate with people, um, while you're figuring out what your target industry job function is or how to market it. You might have an in-between document, what I call sort of a beta resume, but don't call it that and when you save your document. Something that lists volunteer work and past work experience, um, so that you can at least start the process. But for most of us, you really need that target audience in mind to develop effective marketing, right? You're communicating with a person, a hiring manager with business needs, organizational needs. So that's what you keep in mind. Focus on their needs. How do you know what they are? Well, the job ads are one clue, obviously, and then also your research, digging beyond the company websites to articles, blog posts, professional association newsletters, professional industry or job function magazines where or publications where they'll be talking about trends in their industry or in their area, and especially networking where you're testing out what you're learning online and from job ads about that value proposition, meaning what do I bring that can solve a problem, meet a need, work towards a top priority of this industry or these employers. So you're doing that research. Now you start writing your accomplishment statements. And you start with that because that's the meat of the resume. And you want to distinguish it from, I see a lot of resumes, and you even see some in samples online that use language like responsible for managing volunteer recruitment. Well, if that's your lead statement or that's most of what you're saying, that's not really very strong or very vivid, and it doesn't give us the details or the results or outcome or impact. One way to reframe that as an accomplishment statement might be recruited over 500 volunteers, the largest in Walk for Hunger's history, through creative use of online social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and blogging. So, how you word this accomplishment statements and what you emphasize will partly depend on what you're trying to market. But a couple of points to note, or I was able to put in a number, a metric. I recruited over 500 volunteers. I put it in a context, the largest in their history. And then I said how I did it, right? I actually led with the result. Recruited over 500 volunteers was the outcome or result. So we'll talk a little more about how you do that. And some of you have heard this before. This has been written about. You can find it in books and articles online about developing accomplishment statements. You want to tell a story and don't try to be figuring it all out in your head and boiling it into a one accomplishment statement all in one step in your head. We really advise take a little time to tell the story in detail, and then you're going to boil it down. So your format can be PAR, which is problem action results, or CAR, challenge action results. But not everything is a big problem or challenge. In some of our jobs or in some of our situations, we may have been dealing more with a situation or a task. So that's okay too. But start with your first thing. Describe what was this situation or this problem that you were dealing with. Action is what actions did you or your direct reports, if you were a manager working on this issue, take to solve the problem? Why did you do those things? What tools or processes did you use? What resources did you use? And then the R is results. And this is where many resumes are not as strong as they could be. It's a common um, place to kind of miss out on opportunities because it's obvious if I did X and I achieved my sales targets and I sold 1,000 widgets per quarter and won the quarterly sales award. If you're in that type of sales role, sometimes those numerical, quantifiable results are easy to remember, easy to track, easy to see and put into your resume. Some of the rest of us, it may be harder to figure out, well, what was the result or outcome of what I did? Okay, you ask yourself, so what that I did that? Who cared? Who or what was impacted? How much? Can you quantify? Maybe you can ask your former supervisor or manager at the time for help with quantifying. Um, and then other questions to ask to just prompt your thinking about this. Did you create something new? Did you improve something? Did what you did or this project or this improvement impact efficiency or the bottom line or reduce risk? Right? Even if you're not in a role where you're making money for the organization, that you may have a different role, you did something, um, and it impacted a customer or internal efficiency or morale. And if you put something down like that, it impacted morale positively. Well, how do you know? reduce retention? Did it? So you want to be ready. So the long version of this is going to be very helpful in preparing stories for your interview, right? So that's why I always say it's worth doing, even though it is a little more work. But I suggest it's actually easier to get it all down on paper and then edit it and see. You may see that this was such a big deal, it's more than one bullet, or you see the different ways you could boil it down and emphasize different kinds of skills or results. So, oh, and when you're writing the accomplishment statements, you want to use strong verbs, right? Instead of responsible for, like, for example, um, in this one, I said recruited over 5,000, um, and then creative use of online social media. I didn't have a verb there, but you could have, right? You could rewrite it a different way, emphasizing the writing and the marketing if that's what you wanted to do. So you're going to use the strong verbs. Next step, the third step, is to write a summary or profile called different things by different people for the top of the resume. Usually not for a recent bachelor's degree grad. For recent master's degree grads, it's a sort of, it depends. You might use your education section with your master's in it as that, if it really sells your top skill, your top qualification, or you might start with a profile and then have the education later. The reason you do the profile is to introduce you to the employer, to really grab their attention with the most relevant information, relevant to that target role. And you want to describe yourself, hard and soft skills, but try to avoid cliche. I'm a results-oriented team player. So what do you include in this profile? Your unique value proposition. By unique, I mean, you have the skills that you bring, the personal strengths and characteristics, the how you get the job done, why you do this work. There may be ways, the how definitely needs to be in there. There may be ways that the why is going to fit too. The skills and competencies that are the most relevant, again, to this employer at this time. A technical skills section, if appropriate. Now, here's where you think about what is your most um, important selling points. If the technical skills are not the top selling point, they may be in a section at the bottom of the resume, but if they are, they'll be included in that profile at the top. So we're going to talk about a couple of samples so you can see more what I am talking about. So I'm switching to my document and see the one that I'm looking for here. Okay, here's one. So Tara Bamra, this was created by a professional resume writer. Not that you have to have a professional resume writer, but I just liked some of the things that she did with her summary. You see, one thing she does is her header, she has in a sort of a format that moves across the line instead of being in a big block. One way to do it that doesn't take up a lot of space but looks nice. And you can see, look, she uses some different fonts too. She has all caps in a big font, technology product management. What she's done here is given her not exactly a job title, but more like a job functional area. She's saying, this is what I do. Be sure if you use that, that it's directly pointing towards what you're applying for. And then she has blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Those are her key, some of the bigger competency areas. Then she has some text, future-looking product innovator who blends art, science, and design, et cetera, change maker, sorry, cultural leader. If you say something like highly regarded for business acumen, you have to be ready to back it up, right, with references and so on. She includes her MSEE degree here as part of her summary because it's a technical master's degree, but it's not her main selling point, right? If you see down at the bottom, she has the details on her education. But back to the summary. Again, more keywords for competency areas. So hers is a little complex because she has this blockchain section, she has the digital media section, and then she has some additional words underneath. Um, it doesn't have to be this complex. I just wanted to show you an example of how she's making her keywords for key competency and knowledge areas pop out by using different fonts and the layout. So that's one way you could do it. My other sample, let's see. Oh, I have to go get it from, no, there it is. Um, so another way you can do this is by having, technology product management at the top, and then some text, and then a sort of chart listing your skills. And the resume that had that seems to have to go grab it from. Da, da, Apologies for my, it was there. Let's get it back up. Here we go. Yeah, it's this one. I wanted to show you so you'd have the visual. Here, she has two job functional areas: director inside sales, senior account executive. Those could be job titles. And then Susan Jones has two industry areas: commercial finance, professional services. But they're similar enough so that I think that can work. And you'll see she has 5 lines of text and then this format with 2 columns with keywords carefully chosen to express her skills that are the most relevant. And then she has a bolded, chosen by senior management as top sales performer. Again, it's an option. You can pick one standout accomplishment for bolding. So you can see it takes up a little bit of space, but it is the advantage if you have, 9+, there's no hard and fast rule, but 8 or 9 years of experience or more, something like this can be very helpful. And having a title at the top, you're not saying this is my objective in those words, you're just saying here it is, and they can see very clearly. Okay. Back to our slideshow. Um, so back to some format and design questions. So we've talked about how it's helpful to have a summary or profile of some kind to highlight key skills, key abilities, sort of almost like a blurb for the resume, like here's what's important in an easy format. And then having your professional experience underneath with accomplishment statements. And we'll go back and look at those samples in a couple of minutes to show you more in detail how different people do that. But I just wanted to talk a little before I did that about different formats and design. Most common that you'll see most frequently, that most managers expect to see, is chronological, or more precisely, reverse chronological, where you, underneath that summary section, if you're using the summary, and then you have all your experience listing employers, job titles, and dates, reverse chronological, from present back into the past. Another option is grouping similar experiences together so that instead of, you would have it chronological inside the section. Relevant or child development experience and other, or communications and additional experience. The people that really benefit from using this, I think, are students or recent grads, because they've had such a mix of jobs for money, internships, work jobs, some of which are related to the work goal, the job goal they're pursuing, and some of which aren't. So that can be really helpful. I did see one recent grad's resume recently where had her things in, well, I could see she was trying to put the most important ones first, but because it wasn't reverse chronological, it was confusing to the reader who was trying to scan it quickly and go, wait, when was she here? What did she do where? So we talked about in her case, reverse chronological was going to work fine for her goal. Um, but if your top job is not closely related to the goal that you're seeking in when you're chronological, that's when sometimes doing other things with groupings can be helpful. The other type that people sometimes use is called a functional resume, and I'll show you an example in a minute. Functional, typically, recruiters do not love because it groups all your relevant skills and accomplishments under headers, and then your work employment history is way, way at the bottom. Leslie Warner, Alumni Career Services, 2003 to 2016. It just says Tufts University, Alumni Career Services, dates, former employer, title, dates. So I'll show you how that is. And why people do it is if you're changing careers, and it is a big change, new industry, new job function, if you did that pivot or change using a graduate program, it's a little easier. You put the graduate program and any relevant projects or internship or experience right at the top, and then you list your additional experience. But if you're doing it without a graduate program, which is just fine, it's harder to tell that story if you have the chronological listing. So people will use this functional listing where you pull all the relevant experience together, give it appropriate headings, and then list the actual employment titles and dates at the bottom. Recruiters don't love it because it takes them longer to kind of parse things out. And honestly, if you're making a very big sector change, brand new industry, brand new job function, the resume alone is probably not going to open a lot of doors for you. It's everyone's situation is a little different, but it's rule of thumb is the more of a change you're making, the more different the industry is, the more different the job function is, the more networking you'll need to do to get in the door, have those conversations, be able to show what you can do for them and how you can solve the problems that they have or advance. And as I'm saying, you use bold, all caps, italics, and as you saw with the Bamhara resume, you can use some formatting. Font size 10.5 or larger. Again, looks good. See what you can do. You can see in some of the samples, the font size varies, and some of her, like Tara's text, some of it was quite small in some of those little bolded keywords. 1 to 2 pages generally, depending on experience. If you're a recent grad and it's generally going to need to be a page, if it's going over a page, there has to be a really, really good reason, really relevant, important experience and information. So, what if you have more than 15 or 20 years of work experience? This can vary what the expectations are in different fields, but you might consider rising, going back, 15 years, maybe 20, depending on where your natural sort of breakpoints are, and then stopping and using a phrase like prior experience includes career coaching roles in community-based organizations in Boston. That's from mine. You can use that prior experience includes phrase, and it's saying to the reader, I have additional work experience. I'm just not listing all the details about it in this same format because my more recent experience is the most relevant. You're not saying that, but you're implying it. And let's say, in my case, mine were small organizations that necessarily know by name. Some of them no longer exist. Um, but if I had worked at Fidelity or IBM or MIT or brand name employer that's large that people would know, um, I would have included that. Prior experience includes financial analyst and accounting roles at IBM, State Street, and other large organizations, right? You can think about what's going to tell your story. Do you have to do this? No, it's just an option to de-emphasize your age. Um, and emphasize, again, it's a question of what are you emphasizing? It's a marketing document, the truth, but you can emphasize your skills and your contributions and the problems you've solved. So how do you present a resume? MS Word is really when you're working on it, or whatever processing system you use is when you're working on it, when you're sharing it with other people, asking for feedback or comments. Text only, I see that less frequently now. That was more common 10 or more years ago, where you'd have an online form and they'd tell you to paste your resume into the box in a text only format. That actually was the case when I applied at Tufts. That was 16 years ago, so that was a while ago. Then it would let you view it to see how horrible it looked. And you could fix it a little, but you couldn't do a lot of formatting. All you could put in was crosses or dashes or dots, use capitals. So yeah, I sweated over that for some time because I thought, I'm applying to be a career counselor here. Even though it's text only, I need to make it look as readable and good as possible. Less frequently will you see that now. However, you might see text boxes where an employer does sometimes occasionally instead of an interview, instead of a resume, or sometimes in addition, almost like an online typed first interview, they'll have a set of questions for you to answer. And then you type it in and it's a text format. You definitely need to watch your, perfect grammar, perfect punctuation, make sure it's readable and clear. And sometimes people find those questionnaires asking you a lot of questions before to see if you get an interview, find them very annoying. But I say it's a good thing because trust me, they will not have hundreds of people completing that questionnaire. The longer and more detailed it is, the more you can stand out by doing, a thoughtful job and see it. Okay, this is kind of like a phone screen, kind of like a first interview. PDF file is usually the way most of us, most of the time, are going to be either emailing a resume to an employer or uploading it into a employer, resume database. And the good news about that is it's not going to get screwed up in transition, right? It once it's saved as a PDF, that's it. Other ways to present your background and skills, you might build a personal website. Um, Again, think about what's important in your industry, what's important in your job function, your sector. It can be as simple as just a website that says, here's who I am, here's my resume, here's some work samples. If you're in an industry or a job function where you software programming, software development, or a design related field, you do need a online portfolio. And of course, your resume could be one piece of what's available in that portfolio in addition to work samples. Do you need a bio? A third person, Leslie Warner is an experienced career counselor and trainer, blah, 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 written in the third person. You're more likely to need that if you're working as a consultant or speaking at conferences or professional meetings or doing some writing for professional journals or professional newsletters, because then they need a bio to like put in the conference program or the event program, or a short, maybe a very short bio in the publication. So that's an it depends. It depends on your field and your function, more your sort of level and function. LinkedIn, everyone needs, because, as I said, even though you can't tailor it to a specific one specific job function type of employer, you need to make sure it speaks to all your potential hiring manager or collaboration partners. It's still a great way to show your work and your experience, and it gives you more flexibility because you can attach documents, you can attach work samples or video or photographs or that are relevant to showing what you can do. So we're going to go back to our samples to discuss how they use the different sections. And now, yep. So here, Susan B. Jones, again, we talked about her summary, but if you look at her experience section, there's a couple of things I wanted to highlight. First of all, this is a very pretty traditional, there's not a lot of formatting here. Um, but what she does use is bolding and italics, and in the headers, all caps. So she uses these different kinds of fonts, and then here, bolding to emphasize a result, a key accomplishment result. So you can see how even with a resume that's primarily text and doesn't have formatting fanciness of any kind, it's easy to read. Healthcare financial services, director inside sales, oh, relationship manager. I can scan down quickly to see, that all the job titles have the same font and presentation, and it's easy to see. And here she was at the company a long time, or 2000 to present, and then here are the dates for each job, right? You don't need to repeat the employer over and over. The other thing to mention here is she has what we call a company blurb, $13 billion provider of financial products and services to healthcare professionals, acquired XYZ company in 2004. Um, that's showing how to say if you worked at um, company XYZ and then 5 years later they were acquired by healthcare financial services. Sometimes people get a little confused. How do I show that? I said, staying at the same employer, you can do it like that. Um, and do you have to have a company blurb? No. You put the company blurb in if you think about who you're sending this resume to and think, will the hiring manager type folks that receive your resume instantly know what this company is and what they do? Then you don't need it. So, for example, Tufts University, I mean, I suppose if I were um, applying for a job someplace very, very far away, perhaps it would need some statement or context put, but otherwise, no, we don't need to tell people that it's a university, that it's a mid-size research university with blah, blah students. No, people know. Otherwise, it's helpful. Another way to do the company blurb is to fold it into your first bullet or first information under the job. And that's helpful, especially if you're a student, a recent grad, and trying to save space. But here, under her job, Director Inside Sales, she has something we call a job blurb, right? There's no bullet next to it. She's saying, here's the scope of what I did do in this job. Hired to expand existing sales team, challenged to conduct training sessions, collaborate with management and represent team. And then she separates out the accomplishments. Do you have to do it that way? No. It's just one way to make the accomplishments really stand out. Um, so to show you her second page, again, continuing the same um, format, the same fonts. And she calls this section community involvement. And look at it. One of the things that she picks out is something that was actually part of her job. The one thing I might say is I tend to encourage people to put a date, just put a date next to community or volunteer involvement. It sort of anchors it in reality a little more, I think. But again, there's more than one way to do a resume. There's not just one right way. This is marketing. Things can be looked at in different ways. Certain things are best practices, and I'll definitely tell you when I think something's a best practice that is really recommended. Um, you'll see she says ABC College and does not date. Totally up to you, and you can think about is putting the date in helpful, building a connection or to the people you'll be meeting with, helping them sort of place you in that context? Or is it less relevant and you want the focus to be on, for example, recent professional training that she had? And then she has some skills at the bottom. So that's one way to look at that. Then I wanted to look at back at Tara Bamra again for to see how she did the experience. She's doing reverse chronological. I personally prefer to have 2014 to the present and not have the month there unless you really needed to. This person does a really nice job and chooses to do that. So also you'll sometimes when you're filling out an online application, require you to put in months, which can be a little challenging once you're going back into your work history, but you make your best guess. But here again, font variation. There's the employer. There's her title, R&D director, Media Labs. Then look what she does. She pulls out specific keywords, right? And some of them are the same, right, as these things up here, block and AVVR, digital media platform, right? All of those words were in that above. She's saying, here's the employer, here's the job where I used these skills or developed these knowledge areas, these expertise. Do you have to do that? No, but I do think it's an interesting option, especially, managers in a technical area. It's a complex, big job. And so she's choosing to put the different parts and pieces up there and then tell you. Again, she has a job blurb there, but she doesn't tell us what Disney is, right? We know what Disney is, but she has a little job blurb and then bullets, and then she has this section called projects, and then the next former employer. And not as much formatting here, not as was a few more years back, but she's still using the same format of pulling out the keywords of key knowledge or skill areas. And you can see back at her first job, she doesn't put any bullets. You don't have to. It just depends where you made the most significant contributions, where you were doing using skills that you want to highlight. Now she chooses to call this section additional qualifications. Again, you can see, but what it actually is education and patents. Some people would list education and patents as two separate bigger sections. There's not a right or wrong there. Again, she's chosen not to put dates. Now, again, depending on your role, you might choose to have patents and publications as a addendum where you listed them all in detail, right? Depending on your role. And if the patents and publications are a part of what qualifies you to do the work that you do, yeah, add an extra page. You can call it an addendum and have two different versions, one with the extra page with the details, one without. So again, reverse chronological, but with some really nice, and I show you these partly to just show you the different options, different things that are possible. I highly recommend that you look at more resume samples. When you look online, I have a couple of links that I'll share with you where there are some good samples that you can look at, but not all the samples online, frankly, are that great, I think. But if you go to this author who collected this one in a book, Wendy Enelo, she has excellent books with all different kinds of samples. And there she is really a master at self-marketing, and she'll have a book for returning to the workforce from the military, a book for people returning to the workforce from other situations, a book for executive resumes. And the basic resume advice is often very similar, but then the samples will be specific to different situations. So I highly encourage you, look for them in the library. You can also look at other professional writers there are other good ones. We have books in the library that would have samples. I just know I've really found some interesting viewpoints in hers. And it also opens up your thinking because you'll see, oh, there's more than one way to present this, more than one way to do it. Now I wanted to show you briefly the functional resume. This is from Modernize Your Resume by Wendy Enelo, um, one of her many books out there. And you can see he starts his with question, what piece of your IT management team is missing? Answer, Nin Ned Sung, and then solution. Personally, I wouldn't do that because it doesn't fit with how I communicate. But again, think about your audience. If this inspires you, try it out and then test it on managers in your field, not as a job application, but to get their honest feedback. Do they think it's certainly catchy and it's certainly noticeable, but you want it to communicate with your audience. But then he says business focused IP professional. He has 4 lines of text, and he's talking about his unique blend of conceptual and visionary thinking, analytical skills, technical acumen, right? And then he lists a block, a chart, in his case with 3 columns, slightly smaller text. And these are the key skills, the key qualifications that he's seeing in the job ads that he wants to target. He has a whole technical skills section here because it's directly relevant. Then he lists, right, accomplishments, business leadership, team leadership, project management, and under them he has specific, right? Here's one, recommended combining database server with web server, ensuring data security, and reducing costs by 100,000. Yeah, so some details, but you think, well, wait, where did he do that? He's telling us that on the second page, and I apologize for the quality of the photocopier. It smudged the career history a little bit here. It looks clear in the book. Here's more sections: project management, architecture, design, your sections, and then here's the career history, or some people call it employment history. He has a little company blurb for one of his companies. Actually, he worked there a long time. Okay, that is his main company. So why did he use this functional format when I've just told you that recruiters don't love it? Because you see, it takes a while to get, you have to sort of go back and forth figuring out, okay, he was a programmer, a manager, web development. Um, One reason I know from looking at the book is that he had a year of unemployment and he wanted to de-emphasize that from 2014. Oh, he has a typo there too. That's not good. But and the other reason was that he was shifting his job function, right? He was going to stay in corporate business world of various types. Certainly, banks would be a reasonable primary target, but he didn't want to be a CRM business intelligence person or a web development person. He wanted to be the IT manager. And he hadn't actually had the manager title and responsibilities before. So he was shifting job function, um, and wanted to emphasize the leadership and management and other aspects of his thing. So what's going to work best for you? Ask management, hiring managers in your field your target field that you respect, what they would think of this. Because as I said, Ned is still going to need to do a lot of networking, a lot of talking to people, going to professional meetings, conferences, meetups, um, users groups, whatever's appropriate in his field to make connections with people to learn more about what the challenges and issues are, the industries that he's looking at, and then be able to show himself as the solution. You can't just say to the employer, oh, but I can learn all those new things. No, you need to show them you're already educating yourself about their industry, their challenges, their needs. As I said, there are situations where people do this when they're making a big change and they know, the chronological doesn't tell the story the way I want to tell it. One other format I wanted to show, just to show one example. This is a student example, and that's our little notes at the top from our student handbook, is what we call a design resume. And you can see the look and feel is very different. Um, and these are common sections. One of the things that's nice about it is the way the skills section can really pop over here. Obviously, you might not have relevant courses as your information over there if your coursework was a while back. One of the things to watch is that with this type of formatting, you may have less space for the text of your accomplishment, right? So manage social media channels, including Instagram and YouTube. Well, this was a summer internship, but my on this to this person might be to say, oh, well, I know you were just there for the summer, but did you have an impact? Was there something that changed or increased, right? Now, as a student intern, you may not have a lot of opportunity to have impact or results that you can point to, but revised intern manual, including hard copy materials and website content, that's great. And adopt it and continue using it for future classes of interns. That would be good to know. That's a result. But I just wanted to show you. And if the times when you really need to use a design resume of some kind is when you're in a design field, right? This person's digital media, that's related. They have a BFA in studio art in addition to the BA in English. So, yeah, you can look online and find more samples of resumes and how people structure them. So, those are some common formats that you'll see and that might be appropriate for you. Now we'll go back to our nice slideshow. Um, so have there been questions so far? No, no questions so far. That's fine. I may be just stunning you into silence with all of these, this sort of interesting messaging about resume, where on the one hand, it's important as a piece of etiquette, but much more important is your visibility. Who are you? What are you known for? What is your personal and professional brand? That's a whole other big topic, but basically it means, what is my reputation? What do other people in my field or in related fields know about my skills, what I can do, what kinds of problems I can solve? What do people know? What kind of reputation do I have? So some of that is very much by being your professional self online. It can be LinkedIn. That's the starting place for most of us. If you're in a technical field where people go to certain websites to help each other with technical problems or help provide advice or solve technical problems, great. Be there and be recognizable, be known. If you are on LinkedIn, you could be joining groups. Obviously, we hope you'll be in Tufts University related groups related to, there's the Tufts University Career Networking Group, but there might be a group related to your graduate program or your field or your industry. And in that, or in a group, especially a group that's related to your professional self, your job function or your industry, can you be in groups there that are on LinkedIn? Can you be helpful? Providing helpful articles, answering other people's questions. Twitter is the sort of for most folks sort of the next phase after they're comfortable on LinkedIn. But again, on Twitter, it's how are you there to learn? You can follow thought leaders and learn. You can follow companies, but you may also be interacting with recruiters or even hiring managers through Twitter or through other platforms. Sometimes companies will host chats. Sometimes it's on their own, website or their own sort of that they're using. Sometimes it's using something like Twitter where they'll be communicating back and forth with potential job applicants, almost like you're like a customer community in a way, like um, where you're not applying yet, but you are. Perhaps a hiring manager is giving some updates about trends in their industry, and you could be asking questions or commenting. Again, one thing to watch out for if you're doing that, if you're interacting online with a recruiter or a potential hiring manager, is to be careful about your grammar, your spelling, your typos. And that's hard, right? We're used to typing fast, and especially on some of these platforms, texting and so on, you may feel like it can feel like it doesn't matter and that it evaporates. But again, we had a few years back an employer spoke at a panel that I heard where the employer said they did do texting. They used text to communicate with some kind of forums like this where they'd be communicating with applicants or having a group discussion about some industry issue. But they archived and saved those texts. So they know who you are, and it's a positive because they may be developing a relationship with you, knowing more about your capabilities and ideas and skills. That's all positive. You just don't want that archived record, right, to have typos in it. Um, so this is it is a more job search now, and particularly the resume piece is very similar to what it was 10 years ago or in the past. The difference is making sure that your keywords and your important information really stands out through bolding or formatting is even more important now, again, because of the volume of information that past people. If you do get a human being to read it, it'll just be a few seconds that they'll start to scan it. It's not, and I think that sort of pace of work expectation has really increased, certainly in my professional experience. So that's why the formatting or just using basic things like bolding and font variation for your job title versus your employer name, making it easy for them to scan quickly to see those things. That's really important. And then, as I said, all these other things that you're doing, networking, being visible in your professional association, as a volunteer, as a committee member, person helping out with a project. Um, I'd say it's always been the truth that people hired people and not resumes, and that if you were active in your professional association, that would help you be a person to more people in your industry and not just a piece of paper. That's always been the truth forever, forever. It's just things like that are even more important now, right? To stand out from the noise. So you're going to think about how you're going to be visible, what's important to you. If you are you incorporated, even if you're not working for yourself, you want to have that self-employment mindset. What do I need to be learning? How am I visible online? Do I have an updated resume, even if I'm not job searching, right? But even more important, again, engaging with real people in real life, both in person and through being helpful and visible online. Questions or comments? No? Okay. Talking about some resources, I mentioned briefly the resume action words. This is one article with a website called The Muse, and you'll see from the tone, powerful verbs that will make your resume awesome. Site is kind of targeting perhaps people in their 20s and 30s in the tone of their articles and information they present, but their information is in general very solid, and so uh, don't think this is all about awesomeness. It's just these are a good list, and you can find other lists online too. Jobhunt.org, it's not a fancy web interface. It's if you contrast jobhunt.org to the muse.com, you're like, whoa, jobhunt.org is like sort of a little bit older in website style, but the information is solid. The people they have writing articles on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on job search, on resume, they're really known, solid, respected thought leaders, and again, they have good information. So like I mentioned, there are many good resume books. You can check out Wendy Enelow's. She just happens to be one that I'm very familiar with. There are other writers as well. When you're looking at resume books, either online at Amazon or in the library, um, check for the publication date. It doesn't have to have been published last year, but you don't want it to be 20 years old because, as I said, the basic information about um, communicating your experience in a way that directly relates to the employer's needs, that's been true forever. But there are some differences in formatting and how people are using things like the profile or summary at the top that I think have changed, or there's some different options out there compared. So you just want resources that give you different kinds of options. So I hope what I've communicated is that, there's not necessarily a one size fits all. General rules of thumb in the industry, in the resume world, are you I and my. But you do write it with the implied I and my. Once in a while, I see a resume in the second person, like recruits volunteers for Walk for Hunger, manages team of four. That's usually not the standard. The standard is write it as if you were saying I, not she or he, right? And then watch your verb tenses. If you're doing it currently, if it's in the it's an ongoing part of your job, that's present tense. Um, if you've completed the project or it's a past job, that's past tense. Yeah. And it's easy to mess that up, particularly when you're revising a resume from a few years back or from a prior job, because it was in the present tense before, right? And so you have to go through and carefully think, okay, first of all, is this the strongest wording I can use? Do I reframe or rethink that earlier job and how I'm communicating about it? Or but I definitely need to change the verb tense, or now, one of the other truths about resumes is that if you make a typo in a resume, does it automatically sink your boat with that employer? No, but it could. It definitely can. There are employers who will literally have the red pen circle a mistake, and they may call you in for an interview, but then you're looking at upside down at your resume with the big mistake circled. It's not a happy moment. But the sad truth is that with cover letter and resume, if you make a mistake, a typo or grammar mistake, even if writing is not a part of your job ever, it can still put you in the no pile. So that's just common sense tips about proofreading. For most of us, proofing online is not the best. You can certainly use spell check, use Grammarly. Grammarly.com is a free app that you can use, and you can use it on your computer too, not just on a phone, and it checks the grammar of what you're saying. Those things, and it even suggests uh, sort of better or more better wording for things sometimes. Those tools are very helpful, but to my mind, there's no substitute for printing it out. And then one method is cover up your page and with another piece of paper and then uncover one line at a time. Then as you're reading across the line, you go "Director, inside sales," and you dot each syllable with a pencil. And that helps slow your brain down because our brains skim over things and read things quickly and can easily miss, for example, if you've repeated a word or you've repeated a word, your brain might miss it. But if you slow it down with this line by line, syllable by syllable. Now, the syllable by syllable pencil dotting method does not help you think about, does my sentence make sense? Is my accomplishment clearly worded? So pays to spend the time with the proofreading. And then I mentioned briefly, you can it's a great idea to share a resume with people you respect in your field. I sometimes see a resume that someone has worked on and they'll say, for example, a young person might say, "Oh, my parents gave me help with my resume." And And sometimes that help is right on and really helpful. Other times, that other person, if they're not in your target industry, target job function, and they're not at a management level, they may not have the most informed perspective about what can market your skills the best in that specific industry or sector. But the other thing to remember is if you ask 5 people for feedback on your resume, even if all 5 are in your target sector, target job function, you could get 5 different pieces of feedback. So the final word is, as Dan King, a consultant in the Boston area, once said to a workshop I was at, he said, "Don't let anyone should on your resume, as in you should do this, you should do that." So it's sort of a combination advice. Do ask for advice and feedback, but think about who the person is, what their background is, how much do they know about what will communicate and market well to your audience, who you need to speak to. So good luck with your future efforts at resumes, knowing that the additional part of the world now is we need to be doing other things in a resume. And good luck. Thanks for joining us. Bye bye.